Welcome to Participating in Clinical Research 101. My name is Taylor Savage, and I have been working as a clinical research coordinator under Dr. Elizabeth Teal for approximately 4 years. I primarily work on sponsored clinical trials for anti-epileptic treatments, including those for 2 recently FDA-approved drugs, Epidiolex and Fintepla. But I've worked on a variety of projects over my time here. I'm going to share some of what I've learned from this experience in this presentation, helping you to understand the basics of clinical research as well as what to expect if you or your child were to participate in research. First, it is important to understand the members of a research team. The titles are a little different, but the roles generally mirror those of your clinical team. The principal investigator is the leading physician at each study site that oversees all the study activities for that location. They're in charge of the major care decisions while in the study and are usually the physician primarily seen for the study visits. A research nurse is a nurse who has been trained on the study protocol. The research nurse is usually the primary point of contact for clinical questions while you're participating in a study. A clinical research coordinator, the role I currently serve in, is essentially your go-to person for questions relating to the research study. A CRC helps make sure the study is conducted according to the study protocol and keeps track of all of the various details at play. They're usually the best person to ask about what is going to happen during a visit, how to document things, etc. A CRC is a staff member specifically focused on the research, so they're often another primary point of contact for the studies. Research is a very paperwork-heavy field, as documentation is key to being able to both mitigate potential study risks and produce reliable data. In order to make sure that all research conducted is reasonable, ethical, and as safe as possible, a group called an Institutional Review Board, or IRB, must review and approve all study documents and plans prior to the study starting up. Key vocabulary terms that you will often hear while discussing research are study protocol, informed consent form, and informed dissent form. A study protocol is essentially the official plan for how the study will be conducted for all participants to ensure consistency and safety. The same protocol will be used at all locations or sites the study is being conducted at. A protocol guides what must happen during the study visits, as well as how the physician can and should treat the patients participating in the study, although patient safety is always made the top priority. An informed consent form, or ICF, is a document that outlines the key components of the study and must be signed prior to participating in the research. It outlines everything from visit design and procedures to risk and benefits to privacy protections and cost to expectations for all parties. However, the language in the consent form must be at an 8th grade reading level or lower, so it should be something you can understand without having a scientific background. Signing the consent form means that you agree to take part in the study or to have your child take part in the study, and that you understand everything outlined in the form. Make sure to get all of your questions answered before signing this, no matter how silly you think your questions are. The informed dissent form is then just an abbreviated version of the consent form designed for children ages 7 to 13. If the physician feels your child is cognitively capable of understanding what it means to participate in the study, they will ask your child to sign this as well. When thinking about research, it's important to understand that there are many different types of studies. 2 main categories of research studies are interventional and observational studies. Although very different, both types of studies have benefits and can help better characterize or understand a condition or potential treatment. An interventional study essentially does or gives something to those participating in the study and then follows those participants to see the impact of the intervention. Examples of those are drug trials, dietary therapy studies, or behavioral interventions. An observational study is essentially the opposite of an interventional study and does not provide any treatment or preventative measure. It simply studies participants and their condition as they currently are without doing anything to alter that condition. Examples of this type of study include questionnaire studies and medical record review studies. Investigational studies are typically more nuanced in terms of patient experience, so I'm going to be delving a little deeper into this type of study. You will typically come across interventional studies that are either sponsored clinical trials or investigator-initiated studies. While you could receive the same intervention or treatment in either type of study, they are opposites in a lot of ways. Sponsored clinical trials are designed by a pharmaceutical company or research group known as a sponsor and are typically designed to be implemented at a larger number of study sites, sometimes around the world. This means that the protocol is designed to encompass a broader number of potential situations in a wider patient group. On the other hand, an investigator-initiated study is primarily designed by the physician investigator where the study will be conducted. These studies are typically designed for the singular occasion the PI works at and can be more tailored to that physician's specific patient population. Participating in a sponsored trial is then at the sponsor's discretion and usually includes a greater number of requirements and restrictions as they are ultimately trying to produce a reliable data set supporting their treatment option. However, given the extra guidelines and efforts surrounding participation, these studies are usually fully funded by the sponsor so that all study activities are done at no cost to the patient. On the other hand, the participation in investigator-initiated studies is at the discretion of the physician at that location, and typically these studies have less restrictive guidelines as their primary goal is to provide a new treatment option. However, study activities are typically billed, at least in part, to the patient's insurance, so patient cost is something to consider in these studies. While considering interventional studies, many of you may be thinking about enrolling in drug studies as a way of receiving a new therapy not yet available commercially. Depending on whether or not the physician knows what treatment is given to each study patient, drug studies are labeled as either blinded or open label. In blinded studies, the physician will not know which treatment is being given to each study patient. This could mean that the physician does not know the dose level being given, or it could mean that they do not know whether the patient is receiving the investigational drug or an inactive substitute known as a placebo. Blinding is used to minimize any potential bias in how results or responses are reported. However, treatment can be unblinded if the physician needs to know what the patient is taking for safety reasons. In an open label study, the physician will know what the patient is receiving and that they're receiving the actual study drug as well as the dose they would be taking. Many of the studies are designed to have blinded phases followed by an open label phase so that the participants know that they will receive the actual study drug at some point during study participation. Interventional studies typically progress through 5 key phases. In the screening phase, a review of the patient's condition and/or medical testing will be used to determine if the patient meets the inclusion and exclusion criteria of the study and if they're eligible for participation. Once that eligibility criteria has been met, the patient is allowed to be officially enrolled in the study. This would also be when the patient would be randomly assigned to a treatment group, if applicable. Following the enrollment phase, the patient will be moved into the intervention phase of the study. This is the main part of the study when the patient is provided with the intervention and the required study visits and procedures are completed. This would include both a blinded and an open label phase in some studies. The intervention phase can be quite long, sometimes lasting several years, or until the study intervention has been formally approved for those enrolled in the study. You should make sure to clarify how long this phase is prior to enrolling in the study to avoid any unexpected gaps in treatment in the future. Following the intervention phase is the end of study phase. This is when the patient stops participating in the study due to either the end of the study period, an early withdrawal on the part of the patient, or a transition to receiving the intervention commercially. Depending on why the patient has left the study, there may be an additional follow-up phase with visits or phone calls to observe what happens after the intervention has been discontinued. Participating in research can be a time and effort intensive process, so it's important to understand what to expect prior to enrolling. Primarily, the biggest aspect will be regularly going to the clinic for study visits and procedures. These visits could be brief, but could also be full-day visits depending on the study design. Procedures could then be as simple as checking vitals in a standard clinic visit, but could also include extra activities like blood work, cardiac assessments, or an EEG. All of these requirements should be outlined in the consent form so that you're aware of them ahead of time. You will also likely be asked to provide a significant amount of information and documentation about your child's condition, ranging from seizure logs to the details surrounding any adverse events or medication changes. There may also be some safety restrictions surrounding both the study treatment and any other current treatments. This may include when you can make changes to the other medications, which other medications you could be given, or just generally how the study treatment can be given and dosing ranges with that. After reviewing some of the potential requirements for research participation, it's clear that the time and effort required may be considered a downside to participating in research. Depending on what the study asks for or provides, it may not be enough to balance the opportunity of getting a new treatment, the uncertain risk, or the cost associated with participating. These nuanced pros and cons of research participation are why it's always important to consider participation very carefully and to make sure that expectations are clear prior to enrolling. If you want to learn more about sunflower syndrome research being done at MGH, there are several additional presentations during the symposium that you can view. These presentations cover both dietary and drug therapy studies as well as observational studies. You're also always welcome to discuss potential research opportunities with Dr. Teal in the future. Thank you for your time.